Before the first time I went there, I didn't really know that much.
I had no idea what it would be like. I really couldn't visualize it.
Before I went to China, I didn't know a ton about China.
Before I went abroad, I had taken 2 years of Chinese here at Smith, some historical classes about China.
I know it's a very rapidly developing country, so I was expecting some of the similar comforts that we have here in the U.S. to be there in China.
Originally, all I kind of knew was I was from there, and China was a huge place, and people didn't want girls at the time. So
I wouldn't call myself uneducated about China before I went, since half of my family is Chinese.
Everything that I had ever heard about China was from the perspective of Westerners who had not really gone to the real China. They'd gone to the big cities and lived in hotels, and then gone from hotels to factories to restaurants.
I think America, for the most part, doesn't really understand Chinese culture that well.
Well, I think the stereotype of people working hard at Tsinghua was true because a lot of the engineering students just worked all the time, and I didn't understand how they fit in all their classes. Like, I was taking 5 classes and they were taking 10, and I was exhausted already, so I didn't understand how they were fitting in the time to take all the classes and do all the work for all the classes and do all the things outside of class that they were doing. So
there's sort of this stereotype, I think, that the government is very oppressive, which I mean in a lot of ways is true, but it's not something I sensed on a daily basis, which is what I was maybe expecting. I was expecting there to be a sense in which I really couldn't say certain things. That wouldn't be okay, but I really could say what I wanted to say. So I think that it felt more, I guess, free than I was expecting.
I think probably the strongest stereotype that I had going to China was that most people are a little bit subservient to the government, or might be not as passionate about their own beliefs or their opinions, and that wasn't true at all. Everyone's very outspoken.
At one point, I was having conversations about international politics from Chinese perspective. I was talking to somebody who had never seen a Westerner in his life, and he gave me about a 2-hour rant while we were driving back from Chongqing to Guangzhou. He gave me about a 2-hour rant on Japan and America, our international relations, our foreign policy, from the Chinese perspective, and it was really interesting to me.
Chinese people are becoming consumers just like Americans are heavy consumers. So, having your smartphone and going shopping on the weekends, that's a totally normal thing to do in China.
The people there are very, very into high-end fashion.
I didn't really have any preconceived notions about the way Chinese people would treat me as a foreigner, as a tourist, but I was actually really pleasantly surprised by how friendly everybody was.
But overall, it was a very friendly, warm place, and I don't think that's what's really depicted in media necessarily.
For the country as a whole, I found it to be a lot more safe and inviting than what other people told me it would be.
So it's a crazy clash of cultures, of Western expectations and Chinese traditions, Eastern traditions.
It's one thing to sort of know intellectually that China has this ongoing conflict between traditional culture and modernization, and it's another thing entirely to walk down the street and see a beautiful building with pagodas and traditional architecture right next to a building that's all glass and slanted lines, and it looks very modern.
Was that it's a very multi-ethnic, multicultural place, and I think a lot of times American students might think that China is kind of homogenous and every part of it has the same type of culture and beliefs, and it's completely different. It's very vibrant.
The air quality was not as noticeable as I was expecting. I was in Taiyuan, and it was worse when it was in Beijing, but in Taiyuan it was all right.
So before I went there, I knew that there's some grave environmental issues. And yes, the environmental concerns are there, but I was surprised to find out how much the Chinese people are knowledgeable about these issues and willing to talk about it.
One of the biggest surprises was actually the food.
Everyone loves Chinese food here, and really, reality is once you go to China, it's very different, Chinese food.
I had never had real Chinese food before, which is nothing like American Chinese food.
Yes, there's always the stereotype of, Chinese people eating cats and dogs and weird meats. And being a vegetarian, that was kind of like, I was taken aback, when I first heard that. But learning now and experiencing the culture, it's just a natural way of life.
And the one-child policy was also very interesting because I'd kind of thought that it was this kind of monolith, like you can only have one child and it's like very enforced and everything. But actually, I actually met a lot of families who had 2 children and they just like didn't get tax breaks and stuff like that. But it was totally doable, like was the impression that I got anyway, as long as you were mildly well off. And it was just like a choice that you could make. And people didn't really seem very like, I don't know, most people seemed to like support it in a way because they knew that like the population was huge and it would create a lot of problems.
In a big city, like if you go somewhere and you bump into someone, you usually say excuse me, but in Beijing there were so many people you couldn't say excuse me to everyone because you'd be saying excuse me all the time.
I was like stunned by everything when I went there, mostly by like just how densely populated every street and every room was. Like there's really just so many people in China.